Jim and of course Scanco. It's a panel on two sets of ideas that are very important: organizational learning and decision making, of course. Themes and ideas that are defining of Jim in many respects, but also therefore defining of Scanco. They are separate and distinct enough to be written about in separate types of books and publications, but they are also intertwined in many ways. So if you read Jim's work on decision making, you will encounter issues and ideas about learning and knowledge, and if you read his books on learning and knowledge, you will encounter issues of choice all the time. So they are intertwined, and they of course also sort of just the beginning, because when we start to think about these ideas and apply them to issues of how organizations make decisions and how they learn, you surely will see immediately that we import ideas and concerns from other disciplines within the social sciences, or from in the case of Jim, of the world literature, of course, and philosophy. And so you end up in this kind of complex universe of competing ideas and competing concerns that somehow lead to chaos, in a sense, if we do not try to develop some kinds of navigating tools. And in Jim's work, at least, we find these navigating tools very often in these opposing dilemmas, things that are competing for attention and space. So we have, of course, the fight between clarity and ambiguity. We have the fight between rule-based decisions and choice-based. We have, of course, exploration and exploitation. Those kinds of oppositions, dilemmas, which, of course, will make us navigate in this complex universe, but will also never be resolved, will never lead us to a clear end. In Jim's own words, he said, it's all about exercising these ideas, and I hope that is what we will be doing today. So when we have had our panelists present, we will not have a Q&A, because there are probably no answers around, so we will have Q and discussions. Yeah. So that's I hope, the spirit of it. We have three presenters today, or four presenters, but three presentations. Of course, Nils Brunsson, as you already saw, he is one of the founding fathers of Scanco. You all know his work, of course, and I'm eager to hear his take on the issue of decisions in organization and decision as organization, of course. Originally, I had believed that we should collect all the original founders in this panel, but for unhappy reasons, the three others were not able to make it today. So, but of course, the more happy we are to be able to include Morten Vendelø and Bøje Larsen as panelists. They will be talking about the issue of what happened to the technology of foolishness. An article which is very, very old in the sense of being published the first time in 1971, I should say, perhaps. But if you read it today, and I know Jim was particularly fond of that article, actually. He referred to it many, many times. And if you read it today, you will see how it already at that time defined some of the themes and ideas and issues that he had been struggling with all through his career. One of them, of course, this issue of how do you generate novelty. So I'm looking very much forward to be revisiting the technology of foolishness. In terms of Eravara, who will be talking about narratives and the strategy as narrative and storytelling, it's fair to say that Jim did not use the words stories and narrative in a very systematic sense until late in his career. I think actually it's this little nice book of his called The Ambiguity of Experience that addresses first especially the issue of stories and narratives, and it has a chapter which is learning through stories and narratives. So we have an acknowledgement of that. We look very much forward to hearing your story. I think it's so characteristic of Jim that he defines a good story or a good narrative in the following sense, which is against all these competing concerns. And so it has to be elaborate enough to be interesting. It has to be simple enough to be understood, and it has to be credible enough to be accepted. So those are the three criteria you can apply to your stories. So we are looking forward to that. We'll start with the presentation of Nils. The floor is yours, Nils. Welcome, all of you.
Yeah, in this story. They were put high. Yeah, I thank you for inviting me here, and it's of course an honor to be here on this anniversary and at Skankborg in general. And the panel should be about learning and decision making, and I went for the decision making part, you could say. So I would talk about decisions and decision making, and under this theme then, and you could say from decisions in organizations to decisions as organization. And I will present you a very biased story of the theme of organizations and decision making, and make some suggestions to you how it could be developed. Yeah, we could say that now we are all used to this phenomenon that organization studies are about formal organizations. It's almost defined that way, and it's very broad in the sense that almost every aspect of what happens in organizations is covered by organization studies research, and it's almost not taken for granted that this is the topic and the theme, and so on. And of course, this has many origins, but I think it's useful to go back to times when it was not so taken for granted that organizations would be the study object, and when it was more sort of in more of a beginning. I'd like to illustrate that. I tend to go back to the book by James March and Herbert Simon in 1958 about organizations. It had this title, Organizations. Well, Herb Simon had earlier written about where are we?
It's there now, Nils.
Is there now? Yeah, written about administration, but now he and Jim presented a very different perspective that was probably inspired by system theory of the time, where they presented this phenomenon of organization as some form of organism. The word organism is used often in the book, that was thriving in an environment. They didn't say much about this environment, but this distinction between organization and environment was very important for them. They were more interested in organization members than in environment. But this metaphor of that there is an organization and it has an environment has had an enormous influence, of course, and is not now almost taken for granted, and sometimes it's not even perceived as a metaphor, it's perceived as a reality. And even I will use this metaphor in this talk. But the key issue was, of course, what is special for formal organizations? Why should we study formal organizations? And why are not they part of society in general and so on? And their answer was mainly how they differ from the rest of society. Their answer had to do with decisions and decision making. They argue that in organizations, important decisions, important things were decided, and those decisions controlled what the organization participants did. So, for instance, they compared decisions with rumors and found that decisions can be communicated quicker, they can be more precise, and so on, and that changes the circumstances, and that's a reason why organizations are special. And also that by these decisions, organizations created a sort of local order within an environment that was different from the environment, but it was also different from other organizations. And this idea, of course, was very influential at the time, although it didn't last as long as this distinction between organization and environment. For instance, Niklas Luhmann picked up this idea and added another version of system theory, and then that of Mark Simon, and he even defined organization as decisions. But for Jim and colleagues, this led, as you all know, to a large and extremely fruitful program of investigating organizational decision-making. And this is rather natural within a rational culture. There was a special emphasis on rationality in decision-making, questioning this assumption in a great number of ways. So and we all know this story. But then, not so. Some years later, enters John Mayer and Dick Scott and Woody Powell, and coming up with ideas that came to be known as institutional theory. That was a fundamental criticism of the idea of local order, arguing that what had been described in organization theory as a local thing was in fact something that was much more general and referred to general institutions in society, and could best be understood not by studying organization, but by studying things on a societal level rather than organizational one. And from the perspective of the old school here, the most important and most radical concept was, of course, the concept of taken for granted. Because taken for granted explicitly means no decision. So if taken for granted, you don't make decisions, and researchable decision is sort of meaningless in that word. And also it also changed the emphasis on the concept of uncertainty, which is so related. I mean, all this fuss about uncertainty is very much related to a worldview where you have decisions, and also you have decisions with the logic of consequences. That produces, of course, uncertainty. But in a world where some things are taken for granted, it means that this uncertainty almost evaporates. They also eroded, in a funny way, the concept of environment. Because it's a little hard to, I mean, if you think of an environment as consisting of other organizations, of resources and so on, it's easier to understand this metaphor. But if the environment is institutions, it's more difficult to see it as an environment, because the institutions are, of course, in the organization as well as outside. But still, I would say that this distinction between organization and environment survived, and so we got a lot of very fruitful program of studying formal organization, where we distinguish them from the environments, but the environment partly consists of society institutions, not only of resources and other organizations. But what I think is fair to say, that this distinction still implies that it's the organizations that are organized, not the environment. Normally the environment is described as consisting of networks, markets, things like that, but not as of organization. So what I would like to bring up today is the question, maybe the environment is organized. Maybe the so-called environment, maybe there is organization outside organizations. And if we shall discuss that, of course, we have to discuss now what is organization in contrast to what are formal organizations. I think it's fairly easy to answer, and we agree a lot of what is a formal organization, but we don't agree as much on what is organization in singular. And there have been some attempts to, as you know, of defining it. But I have the feeling that sometimes it gets too broad, and it's defined almost as a coordination, which is an extremely important but also very broad concept. So what we have been working with, me and my colleague Göran Arne and some other colleagues in Sweden, is another idea what organization is. And there we go back to this idea of what the fundamental thing about organizations are decisions. Maybe the fundamental thing about organization is also decisions. So that we go back to this idea of March and Simon, but we use it for understanding organization. So what does it mean that people organize and they create organization, although there is no formal organization? Now we define that as a decided order, where people make decisions for others, and we also we also think of that some decisions, drawing from our knowledge about formal organization, we say that some decisions are more fundamental than others. And here is the list that we are using, that we think that decisions of membership, rules, monitoring, sanctions, and hierarchy. Well, hierarchy is decisions about how to make decisions. We recognize this from formal organizations, but we argue that they may also define organization and be found outside of formal organizations. So we contrast then memberships to non-decided belongings. We contrast rules to norms. We contrast monitoring to other forms of observation. Monitoring is a decided way of monitoring, of observation. We distinguish decided sanctions from reputation or from contempt or respect or bullying and so on and so forth. We distinguish hierarchy from leadership. So this is a sort of exercise that we have been doing for a while, and the good, well, you can discuss, of course, all this, but the good thing is that it opens up for at least two questions. You can ask the question whether to what extent a certain formal organization is organized and to what extent it is non-organized. There is more or less organization in formal organizations if you use this term, this definition of organization. But more importantly, you can also discuss organization outside organizations. And we have worked this for a while, and together with some European scholars, I think at least two of them are here, we have investigated and analyzed organizations in various areas of social life. So here comes the commercial. There is a book coming out in spring, I hope, but I have not just now. It's in June, called "Organization Outside Organizations: The Abundance of Partial Organization in Social Life." And there we we treat a lot of instances then of organization which is not necessarily connected to formal organization. So we have chapters discussing what we call partial organization, standardization, rankings and ratings, certifications and accreditation, prizes and awards, various forms of membership without other aspects of organization. And we also discuss phenomena that can be more or less organized and are differently organized. And these are phenomena like this, networks, more or less organized networks. There are, of course, pure networks that have no element of organization in them, but most of the time what is called a network is fairly organized. You know? We have studies of social movements, the organization of social movements. We have studies of markets that are more or less organized. We have study of intimate relationships like love, families, and friendship, arguing that love is a more organized form than friendship. We have a chapter on organized crime, where, of course, you say that crime is organized often, but how is it organized? And how does it differ? The organization differ between the mafia and the street gang and so on. And that's really important for if you want to fight them. You know, what kind of organization do they have, and what degree of organization, and so on. So it's not trivial. We have chapters on social media platforms that are more or less organized. One chapter on international relations, and we have a chapter on brotherhood, which turns out, you know, sounds very unorganized, but brotherhood as it's used in monasteries or in criminal gangs and so on is actually a very organized phenomenon. And we study also a few chapters on formal organizations. One chapter on a firm. We have one chapter on meta-organizations that tend to be a little less organized than many individual-based organizations. We have chapters on monasteries and on Hells Angels, for instance. And what we try to do is to discuss not only the extent of and how these phenomena are organized, but also what drives organization and what are the forces against organization. Because there are, of course, other forms of ordering, like institutions or mutual adaptation that can produce order. Organization is a very special order, and I think it's very important to, for us, I think at least, to be aware of the significance of organization, and that is a different order than other orders. And it's important whether something is organized or not. And here are some aspects of that. A decided order is something that produces uncertainty, that produces challenges because it's decided. Organization, as we all know, are attempts. They are not the results. By decisions, you try to do things, you know, and we have a long history of understanding that. It's also, a decided order produces a little theory of an explanation. It comes with an explanation. That the explanation why the order is like it is, it's because of the decisions and the decision makers. We don't believe that quite, but that's a really important social phenomenon, that they have this ready-made explanation. It's also that the legitimacy of the order is connected to the decision makers, that the order produces and concentrates responsibility in society. These are just a few things that are really important for understanding why we have to distinguish between, for instance, institutional order and decided order. Yeah, okay. I got too enthusiastic about this, I think. If we compare with the institutional argument, what we say we believe in the institutional argument. We just want to add to it. But we agree that the traditional distinction between organization and environment was a little bit exaggerated. Formal organization is less important than they seem. But I understand the institutional argument is saying as because there is less organization than the organization theory assumed once. But we say because there is more organization than organization theory assumed once. There is also organization outside. And that is reducing the power and potential of the formal organization because they are organized outside as well as they are victims of societal institutions. Okay, so you have already thought of all kinds of challenges and protests against this. I will just mention some that we are thinking of. One is, of course, this problem of making people think of organization not as an entity, but as something else, you know. But also these concepts of formal and informal. If you read social science literature, and all the time they come up there, you know. And it's never explained what it means, or almost never explained what it means. But when I read it now, I look upon it, if it reads decided, non-decided, and it fits very well most of the time. But of course, so that shows in a way that we need this distinction with the organization and other things. But it also, of course, confuses the thing because it's such a vague concept. And also, another problem that I think we have as organization theorists, if we want to participate in this program, is that organization is used as a metaphor by a lot of other social scientists. So they don't think it's important whether something is organized or not. So they use organizational language to describe things that are not at all organized. And here are some examples. Institutionalized norms have been called scripts. This is exactly what they are not. I mean, a script you have to decide on, you know. Belonging to a culture is called membership. Well, I think that's not a very good term for it. And the worst case, I think, is gender norms are negotiated. Come on. I mean, negotiation means that you discuss with people, then you make a decision, and so on. This is exactly what they are not. And if they were negotiated, we could change them by a new decision. And you all know that's impossible. Or agency is distributed. Who distributed agency? Okay. So let me. So I mean, and this creeps into the language in a way. So and I think that's a problem for us if you want to have this kind of program, you know, because it's so catchy, you know, to say, oh, there are scripts, you know, or is it negotiated? But it's really blurring a very important distinction. So, okay, here are something that I knew now even less of, but I just put out the question here. Well, what we suggest is then leaving this a little bit organization environment distinction behind and going for distinction between organized and not organized. And, well, one can speculate, of course, formal organizations, well, the heydays of formal organization was the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. So there were all these firms and social movements creating organizations and so on. Of course, it continues in the way that and then came organization studies to study them. And of course, it continues in the sense that there are a lot of new organizations coming, all those who are involved in organizing other organizations, like standardizers, certification firms, ranking organizations, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, but the favorite object of organization theory has long been the firm, and it seems that is not expanding it so much. So maybe organization outside the organization is something that is. I was thinking of reports about outsourcing, privatization, and all that, where you you break up large organizations, but the need for organization may not diminish by that, by increase, so to speak. And so you need more organization among organizations. And if there are some historians here, I would like to discuss whether this organization outside organizations was not the major form of organization before 1850. So these are broad questions. I don't know the answer, so it's better to end. Thank you.
Yeah.